A new world calls across the ocean. A new world calls across the sky. A new world whispers in the shadows. Time to fly. Time to fly.
It's about one moment, the moment before it all becomes clear. And in that one moment, you start to believe there's nothing to fear. It's about 1 second. And just when you're on the verge of success, the sky starts to change and the wind starts to blow.
And oh, you're suddenly a stranger. There's no explaining where you stand. And you didn't know that you sometimes have to go round an unexpected bend. And the road will end to a new world. A new world calls for me to follow. A new world waits for my reply. A new world holds me to a promise. Standing by, standing by. It's about one moment. The moment you think you know where you stand, and in that one moment, the things that you're sure of slip from your hand. It's about 1 second to try to be clear, to try and stand tall, but nothing's the same, and the wind starts to blow. And oh, you're suddenly a stranger in some completely different land. And you thought you knew, but you didn't have a clue that the surface sometimes cracks to reveal the tracks to a new world.
You have a house on the hills.
You have a job on the coast.
You find a lover you're sure you believe in.
You get a pool in the bed. You get the part of your life. You hold the ring in your hand. But then the earthquake hits. Then the bank closes in.
Then you realize you didn't know anything.
Nobody told you the best way to steer when the wind starts to blow. And oh, you're suddenly a stranger. All of a sudden, your life is different than you planned. And you have to stay till you somehow find a way to be sure of what will be. Then you might be free. A new world crashes down like thunder. A new world charges through the air. A new world just beyond the mountain. Waiting there, waiting there. A new world shattering the silence. There's a new world I'm afraid to see. A new world
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the biggest, the baddest, the most fiscally exigent storytelling show in Alaska. Welcome to Dark Winter Nights, true stories from Alaska with your host, Rob Prince.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming.
Wait, Rob, where are you right now?
I'm actually orbiting over Fairbanks right now, Tim. I'm about 250 miles up.
Why?
Well, this last summer, with all the drama about budget cuts and exigency at the university, I decided that I would launch myself into space to avoid getting laid off. I figured if they couldn't find me, they couldn't fire me.
How much did it cost to launch yourself into space?
About $75 million. I hitched a ride with the Russians. It was a nice trip up. Lots of vodka. Lots of vodka.
But, Rob, how could you possibly expect to come out ahead on this deal?
It wasn't really about the money, Tim. It was about the principle of the thing. You see, I've never been laid off. I didn't want that on my record.
But if you'd given that money to UAF, you could have helped the budget problem, and they probably would have named a couple of buildings after you. Plus, where did you get $75 million?
Don't worry about those details, Tim. It was a crazy time. I may have told the Russians I had dirt on Joe Biden.
Okay, well, anyway, you know the Board of Regents rescinded the declaration of financial exigency, right? Tenure means something again.
They did? I didn't hear. I don't get a lot of news up here. Well, in that case, I'll be right down. Dark Winter Nights, true stories from Alaska. Oh my gosh. How y'all doing tonight? Good? What do you think of the spacesuit? Okay. If you are wondering, yes, it is unbelievably hot in here right now. If you'd like to know what this experience is like, you could go home and wrap yourself in saran wrap and then put a trash can over your head and go for about a quarter-mile jog. Be about the same place I am right now, but I actually got the idea that I wanted a spacesuit when I was walking up from the parking lot at UAF up to my office on a very cold day. And I thought to myself, the only way I could possibly be comfortable right now is if I was in a spacesuit. And I actually got to try it out on Halloween. I actually walked up from that parking lot to my office in a spacesuit, and it was very warm. However, the inside of the visor froze because of my hot breath, and so I couldn't really see what I was going. And I developed a huge fear of curbs at that point. But I managed to come out okay. Yeah, I just, I could not stop thinking of all the cool things I could do with a spacesuit if I had one. I wore it to my daughter's parent-teacher conferences. She was not thrilled about the idea at first. I said, what do you think if I wear this to your parent-teacher conferences? And she said, well, I'd probably find it funny in a few years. I was like, oh, it's one of those things. But she came around, and I think one perk of it was that now all of her teachers know the challenges that she's facing at home. So that's nice. Well, I gotta get my script out of my pocket here a second. A lot of people do wonder how much it costs, and I will tell you that the plan is that it will pay for itself. I won $75 total in Best Halloween Costume prizes last October, yes, last month. And so I figure at that rate it should pay for itself by the time I'm 75, so we're on our way there. I also am hoping to start an astrogram business, if any of you are interested, where I would show up to, people would pay me to deliver a special message to people on their special day. So, you know, I hope your birthday is out of this world. I hope your promotion is out of this world. I pretty much should just append out of this world to whatever the event happens to be. I hope your engagement's out of this world. I hope your bar mitzvah's out of this world. I hope your pregnancy is out of this world. Maybe not pregnancy. That sounds a little like something you don't want out of this world, like Alien or something like that. But anyway, I am Rob Prince, and I think UAF would probably prefer I don't mention this, but I am a professor in the Communication and Journalism Department who clearly has a lot of time on his hands. What did you think of the Solaire Studio performers? Pretty incredible, huh? So glad we can have them here. And did you get to enjoy the hot Denali harps a little bit out there? Good. Very happy to have them here. Clearly we have an awesome show for you tonight. It starts with me stopping talking and you silencing your cell phones, please. If this is your first time here tonight, would you applaud for us so we know who's new? All right, awesome. Well, I do want to put you at ease. Yes, this is actually a storytelling show. It just takes us a little while to get up to speed on that. And there are two forms that I need you to fill out. The first I want to talk about is the memory form, which should be in a lot of your programs. And basically, each show we want to hear your memories. We want to include your stories in the program. So write out on that little form your favorite Fairbanks famous memory. Now, I found some people don't know what Fairbanks famous means, and so it's basically someone who's only famous in Fairbanks and for like sometimes a very odd reason. So one of my favorite Fairbanks famous memories is when a guy came up to me and said, hey, did you hear about that? He knew I was into DeLoreans. He's like, hey, did you hear about that dude who drove his DeLorean up from Michigan to Alaska? And I was like, wow, it's like this other version of me is more famous than I am. I wonder what it's like to be that guy, because I was like, I'm the one who did that. So anyway, that's like what being Fairbanks famous is. Is Mike here tonight? Mike, are you here? Thank you for that story anyway. So it's either when you were Fairbanks famous or maybe you had an encounter with someone or something Fairbanks famous. Those are the memories that I'm going to be reading on stage here tonight. You can also post those to our Facebook page if you want to do that. You don't have the paper or anything like that. And so you can hand those memories in to the ushers between storytellers during intermission. You can turn those in at the table too, and I'll read those on stage. Also, we're going to have one storyteller from the audience here tonight. So if you want to fill out the form on the... What? Yes, maybe it'll be you. What are the rules? Do we remember the rules? Has to be true. It has to have happened to you in Alaska, and you have to put your own name down. And you laugh at that every time, and I keep making that joke every time, so it's a sure thing. All right, so that's the deal. So write your name on that form. Again, you can turn that into someone, the ushers between storytellers, or again at intermission, and we will pick one of you to be on stage here in the second half. And if you don't want to tell a story tonight, but you have one, just make sure to make that very clear on that form. We do have a podcast and radio program, so if you're very intimidated about being up on stage in front of all these people, I understand. It is terrifying up here right now. I've already wet my spacesuit twice, Unfortunately, I have my special astronaut underwear on, which is really just briefs with rockets on them. We will have a 15-minute intermission, food by the Hutchinson chapter of the Academic Decathlon and Future Farmers of America. All the proceeds go to them. And the food bank is here tonight. They are going to be raising some money for giving out Thanksgiving baskets and food next week. So if you want to make a donation to them, that would be great. Okay, you got it? Any questions? Good. All right, our first storyteller tonight. Many of us have had mothers who broke the news to us that life isn't always fair. They often did it to us while we were in the middle of whining about something. And that can be a tough pill to swallow, especially when it's your mother who's the one making life unfair. Our first storyteller tonight is Laverne Hakenson with a story we call Fishing for Praise.
Shemai. My dad is late Sven Hakenson Sr. My mother is Mary Hakenson. And yes, I am related to Sven Hakenson Jr., for some of you who may know him. I was born and raised in the village of Old Harbor. And if you use your handy hand over here, bend your fingers back, you have Alaska. In this vein over here is Fairbanks. And when I tell the story about where I'm from, you could point your finger over here, and that's Kodiak Island. Old Harbor is located on Kodiak Island. It's on the south end. You have Old Harbor, and then you have Alatak, it's a cannery, and you have Larson Bay and Carluck. On the other side, you have the city of Kodiak, and then you have Uzinki and Port Lions. The only way to get to the village is by boat or plane. The plane ride is about a half an hour, and a boat ride is about 7 to 8 hours. When I was living there, there were about 450 people, so I was related to most everybody there. I had to look for a husband elsewhere because almost everybody in the village was my cousin or a best friend. The good-looking guys were in Port Lions. I'm not going to say who I had a crush on. Some of you might know him. So I haven't lived in Old Harbor in over 30 years, but I do go back to visit. And when I go back to visit, I like to spend time with my mom, and she is about 4'11". So when I go home, I feel pretty tall. A lot of people are really short at home. And Mom is the president of the BBC. If you haven't heard, it's not the British Broadcasting Corporation. It's Bingo, Banya, and Church. My dad deemed her the president of BBC because she loves to go to bingo, and she loves to go to Banya, and she loves to go to church. If you go to bingo in Old Harbor, you're not going to get rich because the pots are about $10, and you can maybe win the winner take all of $60. In Fairbanks, it's like $100 and $1,000, so a big difference. We go to bingo to visit people and have fun and share stories. And then Banya is a steam bath. When I was growing up, we didn't have showers, we had steam baths. And we would go with, the children would go with the women, then the men would go, and then the couples might go, not couples together, just a husband and a wife, that's it. Don't tell stories to people now. So Mom was the president of the BBC, so there's Banya, and then church. In Kodiak, there's the Russian Orthodox Church, and whenever there's church, you can find Mom there. She goes on Saturday, she goes on Sunday, she goes on Thursday when they have service for St. Herman, and she goes on holidays. There's a lot of holidays. And on Lent, she goes during Lent as well. So I go back to visit, and I spend a lot of time in bingo, Banya, and church. And they're always looking for Banyas, too. They look for people's little Banyas, steam houses, or looking for one with smoke coming out so they can Banya. And in the past, I used to call them up and say, hey, on the CB, you have banya? And then my mom would go, or people invite her because they know she likes it. So I go back to visit every time that I can during the summer to see my mom. I went back about 10 years ago to visit her. She was 72 years old. And when I was visiting her, she said, hey, let's go halibut fishing. And my memories of halibut fishing were with old people. Old people would go halibut fishing, just like old people in the parks feed the birds. Old people sat on the boat and they had like that twine, and they would throw it out and then they would roll it in, and then they get halibut. That was not for me. I was like, I don't want to go halibut fishing. But she convinced me to go, and she said, we'll have tea, we'll have a lot of fun. And so she convinced me, and of course, we have to go to bed early because she's a half an hour early for everything. I think I was even early for this. Probably the first one here, and I got it from her. So we go to bed early, we get up early, and we go halibut fishing with Glenn. Glenn is, he's my sister's husband, and they live right next door, and they take care of my mom. He's amazing. And we go over there in the morning after breakfast, and we see Glenn. He's getting the boat ready, and he has a bay liner. Here in Fairbanks, you have the flat bottom boats, and on the ocean, of course, you have the hulls. He has an 18-foot bay liner, and it's really nice. It's pretty fancy. So we follow him down to the boat harbor, and in Old Harbor, there's only maybe a 2-mile road. So we follow him down there, and he lets his boat out. We get on the boat, pass the boat harbor, and then we see the place where they weigh the fish and clean the fish, and there's always a bunch of eagles. And we get on the boat and we go out, and I get to sit in front because there's no kids competing for the front. And I have wind blowing in my hair, and I'm smiling. Oh, and it's a beautiful day. Normally in Kodiak it rains a lot, and we are very fortunate to have a nice day. So we go out there, and we pass Sheep Island, where we subsist for seagull eggs. We see Mouse Island, where we picnic. It's really pretty. We pass a couple people who are also halibut fishing, and they're old too, because I'm old now. So we go out, and Glenn finds his spot, and I'm not going to tell you where it was. So Glenn finds his spot. He gets his depth finder out, and he looks for a great place to anchor, and he anchors up. And I thought I was going to get this twine thing, and I see him in the back, and he's preparing these rods with bait. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty fancy. So he gives one to my mom. She takes it, and he gives one to me, and I'm smiling. I like halibut fishing now. It's not so hard. And so Mom catches a halibut, and I think her first one might have been 40 pounds, average halibut about this big. And then I might have caught one that was 20 pounds. We let a couple go because they were too small. And then we go back to the village, and we go to bingo. That was Wednesday night. And remember, that's a place where people gather and they talk, and Mom's there. Yeah, I got me a halibut. It was 40 pounds. And the thing is, she didn't tell people, is that when she caught the halibut, she would have Glenn reel it in. I'm like, she's sitting there, she snags it, and that's about it, but Glenn's doing all the work. So I was like, okay, and we have fun in bingo. We see Wilmer, he's our caller. We see Stella, we see everybody at bingo, we smile. And then we go home. That was Wednesday. We go home, and the next day is church. So we go to church on Thursday night. We might have banyet afterwards. I think we banyet every day. And so Friday comes along, and she's like, hey, you want to go halibut fishing with Glenn again? I was like, sure. So we go out, and same thing. Oh, my God, it was so pretty. I was so shocked. So we go out there, and then Glenn's busy doing something, and we're in the same spot. And Glenn's busy, so he says, hey, Mom caught a fish. Why don't you go get it? You reel it in. I was like, okay. So I'm struggling with her halibut, and this one was like a 60-pounder. It's like, nice. And we go to bingo. It's Friday. Same thing happens. Mom says, I caught this halibut. And everybody's like, wow, that's awesome, Mary. It's like, wait a minute. We did all the work. So we go to church Saturday night, and I think we even banyed again. We go to church Sunday. And she said, hey, Glenn wants to take us out again. I'm like, okay, sure. But this time I see Glenn. I said, hey, Glenn, when we go out there, you got to make Mom reel in the halibut. Because every time we go to bingo, she tells people that she caught this awesome halibut. I'm like, we're doing all the work, Glenn. She's getting all the credit. So we go out there, and Glenn, of course, here's what I say, and he's like, because he jumps on Mom because she's the president of the BBC. He does everything for her. So we go out again, and we're out there for about 5 or 10 minutes. And I don't even have my reel yet. And Mom says, I got one. And I'm like, are you kidding? We just got here. And she's looking at Glenn, hoping Glenn will come over here and take the rod. And I said, no, Glenn. She's going to go to bingo, and she's going to tell everybody that she got this halibut. She has to do the work. She's 72 years old. So she has a rod, and she's over there, and she starts struggling and tried to pull it in. And she's like, it's heavy. And Glenn's trying to make his way, and I said, no. And Mom is struggling, and then she starts saying, it hurts. And she's shaking, but I'm still like, no, Mom, you have to do this. You're going to tell everybody at bingo that you caught this halibut. So finally, Glenn says, no. She looks like she's in pain. So he walks over there, and he takes the reel, and he starts pulling, and he's like, oh my God, it's heavy. And Mom says, I told you. And Glenn is struggling, and I'm over there watching over the side of the boat. Remember, it's like an 18-foot bayliner. I'm looking over there, and oh my God, when that sucker comes up, it's huge. I almost fainted, and all Mom says is, I told you. I've never seen a halibut so big. Not that I'm a professional halibut fisherwoman. So Glenn he tells me to go to the back and get his gun. So I get his gun, and he's looking at the hook, and he's like, it's barely in. So he gets the gun and he shoots, and then he gets a rope and one of those like hooks, and he hooks the halibut, and then I have the hook, and he just like slips it off like this. It was barely even in there. And then he takes a rope and ties it in, and then he's trying to pull, so I have to go there and I have to help him pull, and then we have to look at my mom. Mom, can you help us? So the three of us are pulling, and that halibut is fighting, and we finally get it on, and it's flapping, and we're silent. And Mom said, I told you it was big. So we start going home, and we're just smiles and happy, and we see David and his son, and we show them the halibut, and they're all amazed, and Mom is smiling. She's like, yes, I did it. And then we see the sportsmen, the guys coming in, the tourists, getting their halibut, and they're like, wow, that's big. And we take it home, and they try to weigh it, but the scale for the halibut is so small that the halibut is bent like this, the tail's up like this. It ended up being 72 inches, and they figured it weighed about 230 pounds. So They asked me what I learned from my story. Listen to my mom. So, thank you.
Laverne Hakenson. Okay, here's some of your favorite memories. In 1987, when I defeated Ralph Seekins in the State Fair Culinary Competition, my frittata Fairbanks won the Purple Grand Champion ribbon for culinary. I'm sure Ralph is still cheesed about that. And when everyone in Fred Meyer knew who I was, and I had no idea because they had just announced on the PA to say hi to the guy wearing red, I was wearing red, but I wasn't the guy. You get your 15 minutes one way or another. It's not always the way you want it. All right, life in the interior, as we know, can be mentally challenging. Almost all of us can feel down at times. And that can even include our pets. So how do you get Fido out of a funk? Our next storyteller found an interesting way to cheer up his sled dog. Here's Knut Kielland with a story, How Charlie Bingo Got His Groove Back.
Right. Okay.
Remember, the floor is lava.
Okay. Good evening. Before I start my story, I would like to acknowledge somebody that I hope is in the audience. It is Mary Shields, who 45 years ago was the first woman to finish the Iditarod sled dog race. And my story has a few elements that she and perhaps many of you can relate to. So I like to dedicate this little vignette to her, for better or worse. So Jorma Taahavanainen was a Finnish ecologist of some significant scientific repute. He had gotten his PhD at Cornell University, and after finishing that, he went back to his homeland of Finland, where he had an illustrious scientific career and becoming the chair of his biology department. He was sort of a soft-spoken, mild-mannered chap, but that still sort of projected an era of sophistication and dignity, very much reflecting his academic pedigree. And I was kind of reflecting on his accolades one day in early May, about 30 years ago or so. I was standing on the shelf ice of a slough on the Tanana River. And he was present, and going through my mind, this very distinguished professor standing there in front of me, and I was looking over at him, and the whole thing was a little sort of incongruent because, well, the famous professor was standing in front of me there wearing nothing but his birthday suit. But he wore a sort of amusing expression on his face, perchance influenced by the fact that I was completely naked too. So to try to help you understand how this apparent display of Fennoscandian exhibitionism unfolded, I need to give you some background information. Well, Jorma Taahavanainen had come to University of Alaska, to Institute of Arctic Biology, to meet with some colleagues, and that had same interest as Jorma in plant-animal interactions. And we had a study going down on the Tanana River, about 20 miles down the river from Fairbanks, in Bonanza Creek, where we were studying moose and hare interactions with the forests. And Jorma, being from Finland, very fond of forests and very fond of moose, he wanted to come over here and see these studies and have a chat with us. As it turned out, I was somehow in charge of meeting this fella. The person that invited him was elsewhere for some reason. I was working at IAB at the time, and I'm still working there. But so I was in charge with going and picking him up and housing him for a first few days, as well as taking him to the field sites. So one evening then, my wife and I would go to the airport, pick up Jorma, and take him home. And the very next morning, we are fixing to go down to Bonanza Creek. And we're going to drive down there as far as we could, and then take my dog team up to the study sites. I had a pretty skookum dog team back then that I used for field work all through winter. So anyway, we get down there and we unload drive as far as we could to the end of the road, and we unload the sled and we hook up the dogs. At the head of my team, I was a dog named Charlie Bingo. He was a sort of sway-backed, slate gray, blue-eyed beast, weighing about 90 pounds, long on legs and somewhat shorter on brains. But he was an excellent jihad leader, and he could break trail like no one else, and he could poop on the run. So, he was an excellent dog. But he had one little quirk, and that was, being a 90-pound leader and with long legs and fast, he could really pull the team along pretty good. And he had that quirk that when the going got kind of dicey, like on really sloping outfires, for example, or down a really steep, narrow, crookedy trail with all kinds of birch trees planted strategically to have a meeting with some brush bow, he liked to just turn it up a notch. This was not a fatal flaw, but it made for some kind of scary rides. But I'm still here, not too many broken bones. Anyway, now Charlie Bingo and I actually shared a condition. It's called seasonal affective disorder. SAD. And but in contrast to most folks that feel the effects of SAD, perhaps at this time of year, Charlie Bingo and I felt the gloom of depression coming upon us in April, when the supreme season, that is winter, was coming to an end. And so this morning then, Charlie Bingo was still in a state of kind of in a funk. He was out of his groove, you might say. Out of his groove, not there. The prospects of summer did not cheer him up much. But, he was pretty game, good to go for an outing. And so got everything ready, and the professor, Tavanainen, got into the sled basket, kind of scrunched in there with a stanchion. It was firmly in there. And he was dressed for the trail. He had some good shoe packs, not quite as fancy as these, but good. Poplin windbreaker, and he was wearing a beret that gave him kind of a sharp look. I was wearing my downriver hat as usual, which also looks good, but it's not really that sharp. Anyway, we take off, and we're going to go to these exclosures, moose exclosures that we have, and have a look at the effect of keeping these pesky herbivores away from vegetation. So this is now in early May, so snow was scarce. And as we went from the Dance Creek Bluff and across the flats there, it was basically just gravel. But like I said, I had a good, strong team, just 6 dogs, but we were just hauling behind right across the flats, no problem there. And then we got into the woods, and before we get to our studies actually, exclosures there, the trail goes along an old slough. And we've been traveling on it all winter, so it's hard packed, about 4 feet wide. But now in May, next to the trail was a little sort of cut bank, and that catches the sun's rays facing into the south. So there's open water in the springtime. It gets all pooled up, and a little unclear how deep it might be. But anyway, we skirted along, and we got up to our study sites, and we hooked down, and we got to start walking around and looking at our experiment and talking about ecology and bunnies and mooses and vegetation and that sort of stuff. We had a very wonderful chatteroo for a couple hours there, and then we had lunch. The dogs were lying down, obedient, good trapline dogs. Stay. No problem there, but obviously my leader, Charlie Bingo, was still clearly still kind of in the funk, It's nice to get out, but this probably might be one of the last trips out there. So anyway, we had a fine time, as I mentioned, and as the afternoon wore on, it was time now to heading back. And the first part there of getting back to the truck was through the woods, and now in the afternoon with the warming temperatures, the trail, absent of snow, was kind of soft. It's kind of muddy actually, and Dr. Haveninen was sitting down in the sled with a great view of the derrieres of the wheel dogs. But also a recipient of a fair bit of mud and sticks and rocks flying at him. I got a few too, but at least I was standing up. So as we're going along on this trail, he was getting decidedly kind of splotchy and with all kinds of mud on him. And I realized, when we came home, we're going to have to have some laundry to do. Anyway, we're coming up out of the woods there, and we're getting along onto that stretch of trail that we go along this old slough. And it's kind of a nice straight shot. And towards the end there, about 300 yards, it makes a sharp turn. Now, some of you mushers out there are cognizant that there are some nuances involved in how to steer a sled at a high rate of speed, because when we come out of the woods, it was just on the dirt, and now we're suddenly hopping up on this nice, icy trail. So the friction coefficient was reduced by at least an order of magnitude, and we picked up speed. The dogs, like I said, good, strong, fast, well open down the trail. And we're coming up in this corner. As I mentioned, there are some do's and don'ts when it comes to negotiating sharp turns on the dog sled. You kind of are inclined to maybe try to slow down a little bit. Well, if you slow down too much on the turn, you're going to crash to the inside and you climb a tree or into the brushwood. If you go for broke, then the centrifugal force might force you in a different direction with different consequences, but consequences nevertheless. I was thinking about how we're going to do this. I had a little weight in the sled with the professor, and but I I just decided as we're coming up there, the water close, super tight, that I would just, we'll scoot around there just fine. Well, to make a really long story short, we did not crash to the inside, but rather on that softening ice and slick it was, we went sideways as we came to that corner, and we went right into that slough with a big splasheroo. Oh, man. Now, that sled then, certainly with lots more tension on it, was not going nearly as fast. And of course, that started tightening up on the harness on the dogs, which no doubt sent the endorphins of their brains just skyrocketing, and they leaned into their traces and picking up the skin, and the water just rising as we're down in this slough. It turned out to be, as you'll find out, deep-ish. And poor Dr. Tavanainen was sitting there, kind of as, and you know what Charlie Bingo did, yeah. And the water was coming up and forcing him back, and he was just stuck there. And I was looking down on his beret-covered head, and the water was just rising. This is not a matter of a few seconds, but the water was rising really fast, and I realized, and I think about that now. This was almost 30 years ago, and I can remember it as it was this afternoon. I looked down on this beret, and I thought, oh, shit, his head is going under. And it did. He disappeared completely. Yorma. Well, over an eternity of about 3 seconds, there were some bubbles, and he started to re-emerge, kind of like a submarine. And he still wore his beret. Well, all this botchery and a bit of hollering, finally the dog stopped, and there we were. And we climbed on out, sopping wet, got up on the shelf ice there. I finally got the sled up, pulled out the sled tarp, we put it down, kicked off our boots, and started to undress. So now we're getting back to the nudity scene. Anyway, we got everything off, and we just kind of hunched on the ice there. And the dogs, looking back at us, we must have resembled a pair of sort of drowned, skinned muskrats or something. But anyway, we were wringing out our clothes, including the beret. And I was looking up there at my trusted leader, and he was, standing there wagging his tail, looking back at me with a big, happy, husky grin on his face. And I knew beyond a shadow of doubt that Charlie Bingo had his groove back. Thank you.
Knut Kielland. Okay, more memories. Several years ago, I was starstruck at the airport when I realized the slim, weathered man standing next to me at baggage claim was Lance Mackey. Circa 2008, 2009, my little sister lived in Fairbanks and worked at the TV station. One day, she needed talent for a Frontier Outfitters Woolly Rhino TV ad and persuaded me to be in the ad. Now, 10 years later, random people still ask me if I'm the girl from the Woolly Rhino ad. And when I blocked 3 lanes of highway when my car stalled, for the next 2 days, strangers looked at me and said, "You're that driver." Okay, climate change is having a clear and significant impact here in Alaska, where the climate is warming faster here than any other state in the Union. And that has put many Alaskans in harm's way as our ice melts and our storms strengthen. Not to mention, no Christmas and ice in North Pole this year. Oh, that's news to some of you, I'm sorry. Well, this is awkward. There's no Christmas and ice in North Pole this year. That's the news. Okay. Our next storyteller and his team were basically saved from a climate change-induced disaster by his bladder. Here's Cody Dean with a story we call Storm Surge.
The organizing committee said, don't wear something too dark. I picked this up at the Villaggio, or as you may know it, Value Village. My story begins with context. Imagine you're standing on the airstrip at Eielson Air Force Base, and the landscape around you is just as flat. Separating you from high ground is 20 miles, or the equivalent distance to the UAF campus. And that 20 miles is not much more than slush that's knee-deep, and there's 4 rivers separating you from that space. I spent 4 summers of my life on this landscape, the outer edge of Alaska on the Kuskokwim River Delta, doing waterfowl research. It was an amazing place to spend 4 summers or a year of my life. A field season at this camp goes something like this. You arrive in early or mid-April when it's still essentially winter. And in 10 or 12 hectic days, you snowmobile a whole bunch of gear out to a campsite 20 miles away where you're going to spend 3 months. You stay for breakup after you send the snowmobiles back to camp. And you stay through breakup. Summer comes, you work through summer, and you leave in mid or late July. This is a really special place, and I've spent a lot of time there. And it's amazing to experience the change of seasons. In April, when you begin the camp setup, the weather is usually pretty calm and nice. It's sunny, not too much wind, but winter-like still. It's awesome. However, in the spring of 2018 and late April, the weather was anything but nice. It was unseasonably unsettled. Wind on almost every day, snow during the night, maybe some rain. It was just really unpleasant. And we'd kind of been battling these conditions for like 3 weeks, something like that. And we were pretty tired of being outside at this point. So at this point, we'd pretty much constructed camp. And the main part of camp was 2 weatherport structures. And these are metal framed buildings shaped like a Quonset hut. The floors are plywood. They measure 12 by 20 feet. And this would be our main living quarters for 4 months before we would take them down. So we were looking for chores to do now that the snowmobiles were gone. Breakup was beginning. And fortuitously, one of the things we decided to do to stay inside was seam seal our chest waders. Now, we hadn't been using chest waders to this point. We'd just been wearing like Grundon's rain pants and insulated extra tufts. But we would need chest waders later in the season, and we tend to wear them out, so we add extra sealant on the medial seams. And by the end of the day, it was increasingly stormy. We had the waders hanging from things or on things in the weather port so that the seam sealant could dry. So over the course of the day, a storm had been forecasted and the wind was definitely picking up, and by 3 o'clock or so in the afternoon, to open the weather port door, you would grab the outside of the door with 2 hands and slowly let it swing around so it didn't smash into the weather port frame. We did our chores, sealed our waders, made dinner, watched a movie, and it was maybe 10:30 at night. And at this time of year, we only had 4 people in camp, 2 guys and 2 gals. The guys were in one tent, the gals were in another. And we just had our tents up against the riverbank. And this camp is really, really cool. It sits right on this little river that reaches out towards the ocean, which is about a mile away. And there's this little river. So I go outside at 10:30, as Rob said, to go to the bathroom, and we're just procrastinating going to bed. No one thinks that they're going to sleep well on 35 or 40 mile an hour winds in a tent. So I go out and I walk by the riverbank, and at this time of year, the river is frozen solid with sea ice. It's like 6 feet deep, and there's another 2 feet of snow on top of that. But we're right next to the ocean, and there's the tides. The water rises and falls 6 to 9 feet, depending on the day, and it breaks that ice into chunks that are like the size of school buses, and they rise and fall against each other and open up cracks. It's a really, really cool thing to see. I walk up to the edge of the bank, and there's a crack between the first block of ice and the bank, and I kind of stare down into it. And uncharacteristically, the water is churning. It looks like I'm standing in a hot tub, looking down, the water up against my legs from one of the jets. I'm like, that's not normal. And the water was like this far below the bank. And this level right here is like mean high tide for this area. We're essentially at sea level. And that's not normal. The tide comes up. But the problem that's becoming acute to me is that it's close to low tide. I run inside and I check the tide chart that's taped to the inside door, and sure enough, low tide was just an hour ago, and there's 5 hours of incoming tide. I run outside, peer into the gap again, and sure enough, the water level is right there. I walk inside and I tell the crew, 3 other people, we've got a problem. We're going to get really wet. We need to get dressed right now, and we form a hasty plan to probably evacuate the camp. I'll tell more about that later. But instinctively, the crew starts reaching for their rain pants and those extra tufts. And I'm like, no. We're going to get really wet. We need those waders, which we had just seam sealed that day. So we start putting on our waders and figuring out what we're going to do, and our plan is something like this. We've got a boat in camp for after breakup. We'll throw a bunch of tents, sleeping bags, the computers, personal gear, some food, fresh water, some gasoline. We'll throw all that stuff in the boat, and we'll probably evacuate to the south. We got to get all that stuff together. So the first thing we have to do is we have to go out and get the boat. The boat's just sitting on the ground, and we'd left it right side up because we were getting ready to put the motor on it. And because it had been raining and snowing, I pulled the plug out of it a few days beforehand so that water could drain. But the wind has blown the boat upside down. And at this point, only 15 or 20 minutes has elapsed, but the water is now coming over the bank of the river, and it's like 3 or 4 inches deep. And so it's no big deal. You just flip the boat right side up. And as we're doing that, I'm like, uh-oh, the plug was in the battery tray. So we feel around in the grass a little bit. And it's pretty much dusk at this point. Can't find the plug. And I'm like, oh, wait, we still have all that unpacked gear. And I turn around, and we'd stacked a lot of the unpacked totes right up against the weather port out of the wind. And they're all gone. And I see one of the most bizarre sights in my life. The peninsula on which our camp is located is covered in glassy water. It's usually dry. And there's no waves because even though it's blowing like 40 miles an hour or whatever, the water's only like this deep. So I look around, and trailing off to the northeast in the opposite direction from which the wind is coming, there's this herd of like mini hippopotamuses. But they're all the totes, trailing away from us, trotting away. So I take off after them, and I catch up to the first one. That's not the right one. The second one's not the right one. Maybe the third or fourth one's correct. It's like, I know there's a boat plug in that, but it's already tipped over, and it's got like 6 inches of water in it. Most of the stuff's gone. So like, I pull a few things out of it, like I don't remember what. And the last thing I do is run my hand around the bottom, and sure enough, in the little corner is a boat plug. I run back to camp, and this is the first aside of the story. Maybe 20 minutes has elapsed since I first realized our predicament. But I had 3 amazing people working with me that year. They were all experienced, but 2 of them were new to the project. And despite the fact that we were in a situation where everyone should have been panicking, no one was. And everything we'd agreed to get had already pretty much been put in the boat. Like 30 minutes later, we were ready to go. We just needed the plug. So we put the plug in the boat, and yeah, like I said, 45 minutes has elapsed. We get ready to abandon camp. And the reason we go south is because the wind's blowing from the southwest, and the water might come up enough to where all those school bus-sized blocks of ice are going to start floating out of the river. We don't want to be in front of those. So we get ready to abandon camp, and at this point, the water is like thigh deep, even though only an hour has elapsed. So the land has become the ocean, and the ocean is rising at a rate of something like a meter or a yard per hour, and it's still 3 hours before high tide. So this is the second aside. I briefly want to tell you about these storms. The Bering Sea has an autumn storm system. This is a result of cold air flowing off of Asia and mixing with warm water in autumn in the North Pacific and the Bering Sea. This generates storms. They move north, and sometimes they gain strength, sometimes they don't. You may be familiar with these storms. They provide a lot of the drama in the show Deadliest Catch on the Discovery Channel. The big ones inundate the coast, and this is common. But in recent years, the Bering Sea hasn't been cooling, and as a consequence, the storm season is extending into February, March, and April. And that's what happened to us. This may be one of the unexpected consequences of a warming climate, is the Bering Sea developing both a spring storm system and a fall storm system, and it can change the dynamics out there a lot. Anyway, back to camp. So we're getting ready to leave camp. It's pretty much dark at this point. Water's like this. And we have to go 75 yards, and what's to the south of us is a frozen slough that has no cracks in it. It's like 20 feet wide and 15 feet deep. So it's just this giant ice cube, right? Our goal is to get there, get up on top of that. So we begin making our way south. And the problem is the landscape's pocketed with these like little canals and little ponds. And so when you're in water this deep and you risk stepping into something this deep, you might top your waders, which we don't want to do. We eventually find our way up to the edge of this ice. Nobody tops their waders. 2 of us are pulling the boat. 2 of us are pushing the boat with all this stuff. But we get up to it, and the wind is pushing this ice so hard that the frozen bank, it's getting broken into blocks that are like 3 feet long, this deep, and this wide, from the ice just pushing up and against it. We use a shovel to kind of probe around, and eventually we find a safe way to get up on top of it without falling into some mystery hole. We drain the boat, and we get up on top. We call my supervisor, and there's not too much he can do. Obviously, he's a long ways away. There's not too much the Coast Guard can do either, because they're 450 miles away in Kodiak. And as we later learned, it was gusting to over 60 miles an hour during the storm. So we do what you would do, of course. You just stand around and talk, waiting for the storm to go down. Like, it was too windy to put up a tent, and you had to stay warm, so we just stand around. And if I say 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that, we can actually tell the water's maybe starting to go down a little bit. It seems like the wind's starting to recede. And I think we'd maybe arranged by this point that we were going to have a helicopter pick us up the next day at some point, because it seemed like the storm was going to die. And so we're just on the ice, and by 5 o'clock it's like notably calming. You can see vegetation sticking up on the peninsula. So we put up a tent around 5 and try to sleep for a couple hours, and when we wake up 2 hours later at 7:30 or something, it's dead calm. Spectacle lighters are flying over the top of us. And the camp, the weather ports are still standing. We go inspect it. Basically, everything has floated to the far end of the peninsula where it was stopped by the ice of the river. What happened is the ice floated up and formed like a buoy system. So stuff couldn't float past it. But it's just like the overwhelming, incomprehensible mess. Everything's covered in mud and salt water. We spend like the day after being awake all night pulling stuff out of the river, like the most important things. And we had no idea when we'd go back out there. Helicopter comes mid-afternoon. They pick us up and we leave for Bethel for about 7 days. We didn't know what was going to happen, but the short version is this. We came back out 7 days later, and during what is usually one of the most pleasant times of the year, we would like work like crazy to drag all this stuff out of the river. And we keep doing our field work, and the field season's a success. We spend 3 more months out there. It's a great season. But as the season's coming to the end, I start thinking, just in the back of my mind about like, it's really awesome what we're doing. And I'm going to use a phrase here. I'm going to call it a hero's parade. I start thinking about like this project, which has been going for a long time, was in a financial crisis in addition to the flood. And I start thinking about the people that are benefiting from the work that we're doing. I'm like, man, it'd be really cool if like this happened or that happened after this season. Anyway, the crew did an amazing job. The season ends. But that's not the end of the story. The second part of the story is got a bit of a moral to it. Maybe life's kind of like the tides. We never quite know what's coming. I come back to Fairbanks in late July, and like 2 weeks later, you may have heard about this. I suspect there's a few of you out there. I go up to Esther Dome on August 11th, and I'm riding my mountain bike, and I crash in one of the infamous dips on the outer loop. I break 3 ribs, my collarbone, and I crush my skull on the right side. I have 4 fractures between my eye and my ear. I spent 2 nights in the hospital, and totally black out for the night. I don't remember the accident or anything. And I get discharged after the second night, and like 10 days later, I go back to work. And as a side job, I was teaching a course at the university, and I never instructed a course. I was looking forward to it, but I just jumped right back into work, probably too fast. Definitely too fast. For sure too fast. I don't file a disability accommodation or anything like that. I'm just kind of in a blur going through the motions. And I think the project was close to getting a bunch of new money and has like 3 years of summer salary in it. But it turns out I love teaching. I just love instructing this course. And what's great about it is it gives me lots of focus. Because as can be expected after traumatic brain injury, I'm struggling with frequent anxiety and depression. And teaching that course and seeing the 35 students gave me like a focus. I wasn't thinking about anything extra like rewards or compliments. I was just trying to do my job. And why this is really important is at the same time, I was getting fired from my research job because I wasn't getting the support or the conditions that I needed for a healthy work environment. And so not only was I dealing with all this mental unrest and the cloudiness from the accident, but people that I'd worked with for, some of them 5 years, they were saying, good luck, go do something else. And the take-home message from all this is, earlier in the season, when I was thinking about how cool the work was that we were doing and the people that would benefit, I began confusing the motives for why we do work and the decisions we make with the consequences. Those compliments and praise or thank you and all that stuff, that's a consequence of the decisions that we make and the things that we do. When we start confusing those with the motivations, we're mixing up why we're making decisions. And so that's my lesson from this whole story. I thought that I understood the idea of why we do things pretty well before all these accidents happened and the flood and all that stuff. But what these experiences have taught me is that I hope that I know this idea a little bit better, that we need to just stay focused on the job that we're doing. And whatever comes out of that is just a consequence, not a motive. Thank you so much for listening to my story on this dark winter night.
Cody Dean. And yes, to be clear, I do not do this show for the praise. I do it so I can deduct a spacesuit cost from my taxes. Okay, it's time for intermission. Please turn in your audience storyteller form during intermission so we have someone to call in the second half when we come back. We'll take more of your memories. We got some cool Dark Winter Night swag, including a new shirt that you can buy. Go show some love to the food bank and check out food that Hutchinson chapter of Future Farmers American Academic Decathlon are putting on. I'll see you in 15 minutes or as soon as it takes me to go take an ice bath. The Innu UPAC dancers. All right, a couple of super quick announcements as folks are getting settled here. We're going to have a storytelling night at Black Rapids Lodge on January 18th. We're partnering with them for a night of fireside storytelling, music, great food, and drink. And it's one more reason to share your stories on Dark Winter Nights. Your story might earn you a dark winter night in a beautiful mountain lodge. And get more information on that will be coming at Black Rapids Lodge at blackrapids.com or our website, darkwinternights.com. And then we already know the date of our spring event. It's going to be February 29th. Do I have any leap year babies here tonight? Oh, 2? How old are you now? 2. We got one who's 2 years old. All right, well, we'll have a special little promotion going on. If you have a leap year birthday, you will get in for free. And clearly this is not going to cost us a lot, so that's good to know. All right, I got some more of your memories. My boss's dog team was loose on the Steese Highway. She wasn't on Facebook, but her dog team was. My son made the news once. There was a broadcast about a state wrestling champion with a video illustrating how easily he could throw his opponents across the mat. My son was the opponent. I sent the video to family back home. And telling the wild card story at the last Dark Winter Nights live show, the making of the story of the Delta Hand. Bobby Burgess, does that mean you're here somewhere tonight? Yeah, over there somewhere. That's on our podcast if you want to hear that. So, okay. Remember the rules for our audience storyteller? That's disconcerting, but okay, it's too late now. So, to bring in our audience storyteller name, please send in Curry the Goat. You talk about Fairbanks famous, Curry the Goat is giving us a run for our money on our Facebook likes right now. And Jude Huffman is here bringing in Curry. And Curry is a wild goat, folks. See, as you maybe know. Let's give you a little backstory on him. Jude, what exactly, I see you brought your parole officer here, Curry. I know that you got in a little trouble with the law. It's him you're watching. I didn't know anything. So, we're going to need a cleanup on aisle 3. Come on out with that paper towel here. Yeah, don't wait. Well, it just goes and goes. Well, okay, we're going to speed this up. So, Jude Huffman, you're the one who, are you taking care of Curry? Oh, he's got more going on back there. That's okay, Curry. I did that in the first half, too. Just no one could tell. Jude, what exactly, for those of us who maybe aren't familiar with Curry's story here, what exactly, he's eating your clothes, is the epic story of Curry's launch to fame here? What did he do?
Oh, he escaped from being butchered and was on the run.
He was on the run from the law for like a couple days, right?
Yeah.
3 days? Yeah. And so people were posting pictures of Curry as he was making his way through the interior here, on the lam, which, sorry, Curry, I guess that's not the right phrase for it, and then there was there's a lot of Facebook chatter about it, and then there's a pretty epic picture of Curry as he was in the back of a police vehicle, correct?
Yep.
That's an awesome picture of him. You're getting a little butted there. And so now that Curry is he's got the ankle thing going on. I see he's got the ankle band. We're taking this, he's been arrested, so he's on parole now up here. But now that Curry has served his time and he is out now, what is Curry's mission now as he proceeds on with his life post-incarceration?
I don't really get the question.
Oh, yeah. I don't really know what I was asking either, but I think, he's doing things to help be kind of a mascot for other people who have been incarcerated and are trying to adjust back to society, right?
Yes, he's also the mascot for the bridge, which is helping people get out of jail.
Well, I want to clarify that a little bit. Technically, that is true, but I think what you mean is helping people adjust to society after they've been let out of jail. Though it does look like he could take down a couple of jail walls there if he wanted to. Curry, do you have any words of encouragement for people here tonight about making a new life for yourself after you've had some rough times? Oh. No? That's... Okay, yep. Well then, I think we've achieved what we set out for here with this interview. And I'm scared to say that the audience storyteller name is hanging around Curry's neck right now, and one of us is going to have to bend over there and get it. I think you probably heal faster than I do as a young man, so I volunteer you, Jude. Yeah, it's in there. You want to fish around in there and pull, or... Okay, you don't. Fine. Can you distract him or something? Well, Curry, look at that goat over there. Oh, quick. Okay, good. Thank you. Curry, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Jude. Sheesh. He may be out of prison, but I think he's still got some adjusting to society he's got left to do. Okay, well, there are key moments that can totally change the course of someone's life. We just don't usually expect those moments to be ushered in by a fugitive goat. Our storyteller tonight is Kat Gowee. Ooh, there she is. Make your way up here over the right. We have somebody from my team available to, you can come up the stairs. Oh, here comes Robin rushing down to help you. Okay, great. You made it. Kat, congratulations. Just get up and close to the mic. You'll be good to go.
Hi. So I embarked on a new part of my life about 4 years ago. I'm a high school teacher here at North Pole High School. And I have a new summer job. We have an Airbnb in Kodiak, Alaska. And so I've been spending my summers down there. Well, I'm also a huge animal fan. I love my dogs, so they have to come with me. And last summer, I added a Malamute to my family. And he's not small. And so we park in Homer and we take the ferry over, and then we have a boat that we keep in Kodiak that we take out to Whale Island cabins where we have 3 cabins. And so last summer I had to go by myself. And so I had my lab, who's a spaz, like all labs. And then I had this 120-pound puppy. And so I parked my truck, and I had the foresight to order a 75-pound kennel to help me with my dogs. And so I had to order a dolly. So the routine is I carry the 75-pound kennel onto the ferry, and then I go back and set it up, and then I got to go back out and get the dogs and let them drag me onto the boat. And that's just that part of the trip. After I get to Kodiak, then I have to get the dogs from the boat to my truck, to the other boat, and out onto the water. Well, I had promised my husband that I wouldn't try to land our 21-foot Hughes craft by myself. And so when I got to the island with the dogs, I let them out of the kennel, and I moored up in the cove where our cabins are, and I was trying to untie the inflatable from the top of my boat, and I heard this huge splash, and I look, and the Malamute is in the water like, oh crap, this is so cold. And he swims around the boat, and he climbs up on the swim deck, and he's like, all right, I'm over it already, and no more of that for me. And so I got in the raft, and I went to the shore, because we have a rowboat on the island, and I called my lab, and he jumped in and swam to me, which was a shocker, because he's like the world's only lab that can't swim. And his mom floated like a buoy, but he sinks like a stone. And he's really awkward, just saying. And so anyway, he made it to the shore, and I had to go back out and get my stuff. So I decided to pull the raft back out there with me while I went out with the rowboat so that I could use the raft as sort of a trailer for my stuff. And so I went back out to my boat, climbed on, secured both the raft and the rowboat, and I started throwing stuff in the raft. About the time I finished, I turned around, and the Malamute was sitting in the rowboat. I'm ready. Like, he had climbed out of the boat by himself onto the swim deck and gotten into the raft by himself. So that was nuts. And then this past summer, I added another Malamute to the mix, because I'm crazy. And she was a puppy too. She was about 10 months old when we went out there. And my husband was working on Kodiak this summer, so it was very cool. Every Friday night, I got to go over to Kodiak and pick him up and bring him out for the weekend, then take him back on Sunday. Well, my lab just loves people to no end. He can't get enough of people. And so when I got back, he wasn't on the beach, and the big Malamute was. I was like, where did the lab and the puppy go? And they were nowhere to be found, so I went up to the cabin, and about 15 minutes later, the lab showed up, and he was wet from snout to tail. And I was like, uh-oh. Like, something bad had to happen for him to want to get in the water, you know? And I looked, and my female was on the other side of the cove. And so what had happened was when I left, he's like, oh, let's go explore. And he took her around the cove. But when he saw me come back, he's like, she's home. I have to be there now. He swam across the cove to get back to me and left her on the other side. She was like, what the heck? So I had to go get her. So I get in the rowboat, because it's a long way around. So I get in the rowboat because it's going to be easier than walking all the way around to go get her. And the waves, there was waves and wind and rain because it's Kodiak. And I get to the other side, and she has come out onto these rocks. So she's like, you know, on an island of rocks. And I back the rowboat up to her. She will not get in it. She will not. I had to muscle her into the boat, and then like, oh, yeah, it was bad. Anyway, so that's trying to deal with these dogs. Well, they're pregnant now. My husband says we're keeping them all. Thank you.
Cat Gowee. All right. Let's see. We got some more memories for you here. I gave out candy at Pioneer Park's Halloween Town. My guy and I dressed up as Jack and Sally from Nightmare Before Christmas, I presume. A mom asked us to take a picture with her child, and we ended up as a Facebook cover photo. I photobombed a picture of Don Young. I want to find that. Post that to our Facebook if you have that one anywhere. And I once went to check in for a flight on Alaska Airlines and saw Ted Stevens in line. After checking in, I went outside. Whoops. A cliffhanger there. To smoke a joint. Which was then illegal. I was the last to board the plane. When I made my way to my seat, I realized I was seated right next to Ted. It made for an enjoyable, if not paranoid, flight. All right, you guys always come through for us on this. We think, are they gonna have Facebook Fairbanks famous memories? They're gonna have Fairbanks famous memories. Okay, so the fish out of water storyline is a popular one. We love seeing people taken from the place where they are comfortable and dropped into a place where they are very uncomfortable. However, the phrase fish out of water is not really sufficient to describe to the degree of change our next storyteller experienced. It's more like if you took a fish and launched it to the moon. Here's Hadahra Ben Israel with a story we call Where Are All of the People? We're going to do an interview on the many stories, the countless stories she's had about her experience as a child up here. So give a warm welcome for Hadahra Ben Israel.
Test.
Working?
It's working.
Oh, mine's too. That's great. So first of all, the reason we're doing an interview with you is you have just a million stories from your experience, which was about coming to Alaska as a girl. First of all, tell us about where you came to Alaska from and the circumstances around.
Hi, Rob. Thank you.
Yeah.
And before I say anything, I just want to say a disclaimer. I absolutely love Alaska, and I'm very proud to be here. And I love my parents. But I'm going to tell you from the view of a 7 3/4-year-old, okay? So give me a break and don't say what a whiner. I was 7. Okay, so the year was 1971, and I lived in San Jose, California, with my dad and his wife and my 2 brothers and her 4 children. So we had the Brady Bunch going on, and we had a formal living room that every night my dad would come home and play the trumpet into the Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. And my uncle had a Mach 1, and we used to go to the pool and pick grapes, and I wore white shorts and white shoes, and seemed normal to me. And then I heard in school, I was in 2nd grade, I heard Christy, because I didn't come here as Hadahra, I came here as Christy Horner, and grew up as Christy Fett. So anyways, I heard in school, Christy's going to Alaska. And I wasn't quite sure what to think about it, to be honest with you. I was like, I had gone through quite a bit already. My mom was from San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury. She burned her bra. And, and unfortunately, she got a little dipped into things that a lot of people tried, and she did, and she had to get out of the city. And my grandma bought some land, so I'm backing up and giving you a little more history. My grandma bought some land in Delta, and my mom is from Oakland and San Francisco, and she's a quarter Cherokee, and the nicest person in her life was her grandmother, who was full Cherokee, and so she always dreamt about being like her grandma. And so when Grandma bought land in Alaska, she came to Alaska. She hitchhiked. And so then Christy hears, we're going to Alaska. And I'm like, okay, and they start showing movies of chewing skins and igloos, and but I still, to be honest with you, I don't remember cognitively really processing it. I was just kind of like, oh boy, here we go again. And my mom.
Right. And the circumstances was your parents had gotten divorced, your mom had won custody, and she basically sent for you and your 2 brothers to come up to Alaska by yourselves. And the reason that you bring up the point that you were 7 3/4 years old is because your trips, right from the very beginning, you had to lie.
I had to lie.
Why?
Back in 71, you could only fly alone when you were 8. So, and I happen to have 2 older brothers, but I'm a typical girl, and I was the worrywart, so I held the tickets. I do remember that. And yes, they had gotten divorced, and my mom, I guess, won custody of us. And so we got on the plane, and the plane rides were way better back then. They gave you little flying pens and peanuts and stuff and cards, and it was just like a vacation on the plane. And anyways, we arrive in the Fairbanks airport, and we get off the plane, and it's kind of a small, quiet, nothing airport, and comes my mom across the thing, and I look, and she has this big stomach. And so I'm like, okay, but she's my mom. I missed her, cried for her every night, you know. And then standing next to her is a man all dressed in leather. Leather pants, leather shirt, headband, beard. And I'm like, oh my God, Daniel Boone? And so then we load up, we get in the old Rambler, and which is a station wagon, by the way. And then we start driving, and driving, and driving, and driving. And to this kid, I'm like, oh my God, where are all the people? Because, you know, my brain wasn't like, well, you know, there's a place in the world that has no people. I wasn't thinking that, so I'm like, where are all the people? And we drove and drove and drove, and we ended up in Delta Junction, and we took down the Alaska Highway 5. I think it was 5 Point Alaska. You know the mileposts here, so it's either 4.9 or 5.0. Trust me, when I got out of there, I ran. But anyways, then we drove to the end of this dirt road and parked, and all of a sudden I looked through the woods, and it's all woodsy. There's a little cabin, and it's 12 feet by 16 feet, a moose skin and a kerosene light, and 32 dogs not chained up. And I think my eyes got as big as saucers, and I just was in shock. And she had...
And when you say moose skin, you mean moose skin door.
Moose skin door.
And when you first told me that, I thought you mean you had a moose skin on the door.
Oh, no, it was a moose skin door.
The door was just a moose skin.
Yes.
And this is from California.
Yes.
That morning. To this cabin with a moose skin door.
Yes, and a kerosene light, which we had quite a long time, and then we upgraded to propane.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And now
so no electricity.
Yeah.
And then another thing that boggles my mind was the bathroom situation. Tell us a bit about...
My vocabulary was lavatory, waste paper basket, galoshes. That was my vocabulary when I arrived, and it was go find a tree. There wasn't a bathroom, there wasn't an outhouse. It was just go find a tree. And I got to be honest with you.
Year-round.
Year-round.
Yeah.
And I think we probably held it a lot. Anyways, in the 12 by 16 foot cabin, there were 6 kids in there. And it really, really, I can tell you, you walk in the door and you have to kind of step up and duck down. But the logs were big. I mean, this was a cabin, no bear is going to take the corner off of this cabin. And nice peeled logs, you know. So we weren't looking at old peely, yucky logs. We were looking at nice logs. But it was 12 by 16. And so you walk in, and right there to the right is a wheel spool that carries the wire cable. That was our table. And we had a shelf with leather straps that eventually got a TV from my grandma that we charged on the car battery. And you knew the TV was getting low because the TV screen would get small. And then right by there was a little pantry, and then a cubby, and above it was a loft with 4 mattresses, a double bed on the other side of the cubby, a little crib at the end of the bed, believe it or not, a rocker, a 4-burner propane stove, and then a barrel cast iron stove, and 2 little windows. I used to ballerina through that little 12 by 16 foot space. And so I was there from 8 years old to when I left home at 14.
And if you had guests?
Well, in the summer, we lived in cars. That old Rambler became a broke-down bedroom for me. And
so you every night you'd go out to the car and curl up and sleep in the car?
Yes. And mosquitoes were a pain, but we figured out about mosquitoes. Trust me, I know a lot of stuff about Alaska.
All right.
I mean, so then also one of the shocking things to me was, and that my little 7-year-old complained a lot about, he started skinning in there. He was a really good trapper. Larry Fett, he's not alive anymore, but he was an amazing trapper. And anyways, I learned how to skin, and I tried to get into it because I was a kid, and I still wanted to have a life, you know. So I was like, you think I can bring some eyeballs to school? And he said, sure, and I don't know who got the eyeballs out, but I boiled them, and all the color went out. And so I was like, well, I don't want them anymore. And I have to say, when I first in school, I remember sitting in school and then looking out the window going, what are we doing in school at night? And they said, it's not night, it's 3 p.m. And I think it was very close to that time when I noticed that it just started getting dark. we had to get home, and we walked a mile through Fett's Farm, which is the largest chicken farm in Alaska. We had 10,000 chickens. But we were really kind of a pain in their butt, to be honest with you, because the farm didn't want us to take their oldest son and distract him with a little family in the back. So we had to walk through that farm kind of quickly, back to our cabin. And one day after school, it's dusk and dark, and it's my 10-year-old brother, my 9-year-old brother, and me. And we're going down the road, it's dark, and all of a sudden I look up in the sign and we can hear, and I'm like, oh my God. And I remember looking through the dark, and it's dusky, and we could see the black shadows. Our road was blocked by a whole herd of buffalo.
Which happens very rarely in California, from what I understand.
And so I just remember being like, I think I kind of blinked out a little bit, because I just grabbed my brother, and I just remember the buffalo are the scariest looking things to me. They still scare me, even after being around them a lot. And I just grabbed my brother, and there's such thing as a high road and a low road, and the high road, he just, it's more like a trail, and then the regular road, and he grabbed me and dragged me around the side, and I don't remember actually getting home, so I must have just went into a zonk out. But the buffalo, we had many encounters. Delta used to be full of buffalo back in the 70s, and our fields would load up.
And you had bear issues as well, right?
We did. Those 32 dogs, they never pulled a sled. And there was a lot of dog poop. And, and so you just kind of go with it. And my dad, I realized later, my stepdad, he used to put a pork hide over the generator just to call the bears into the yard so that he could just take care of them right away and not have to worry about them, because he had honey hives and we had kids. And I learned later that's why he had the 32 dogs, is because it was our alarm system. You never missed a beat when those dogs were around. But and so he would put the pork hide, call the bear in, kill it. We'd be inside the cabin looking through that dinky little window with all the rah, 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 rah. And one time, one of the bears did get one of our dogs with one swipe and took her whole cheek off. And her name was Heidi, and she lived, but she lost a cheek.
Wow.
Yeah. And just trapping, I had a trap line with him. He had a trap line, took me out on the trap line, and hence this. And I do fly with this and go to the city with this. And my city dad, who's, Herb Alpert, he's like, don't touch it. And I'm like, I love it. Except it's hard to explain to my grandkids the face. They're like, Bubby, what happened?
That thing had a face at
Yeah,
one point.
so I haven't quite gotten that down really well yet.
And then there was a story about a baby in a wheelbarrow, too, tell us about the baby in the wheelbarrow.
Well, my mom was extremely creative and very literate and very, we listened to Fantasia out there. We had Reader's Digest, Nancy Drew, and all that. We were very literate. But she also had this wild side. And she she had a friend who was pregnant, and they were like, oh, let's birth it out here. And I'm like watching, because in my day, kids were seen and not heard. Okay, so I'm always watching. And I remember conversation that the lady had a problem bleeding. There was a blood problem. And I'm thinking to myself, what are these guys doing? But they're moving on ahead with it. And so we were in that little cabin, but my mother was always screaming and yelling about the big cabin. We had to get in that big cabin because we were so squished. And the big cabin never got finished. It always had visqueen on the windows, and the basement was always falling in. But for the birth of the baby, she was in the big cabin, and there I am standing at the end of the bed. I did not participate. I love my mom dearly, but she's wilder than me. And I just remember the head crowning and just kind of being zonked again, and then getting stuck, and then my mom getting a pair of scissors and saying somebody sterilize it, with fire, and she sterilized it, and then the snip, and then the baby. And then they left the baby connected, put it on her tummy, wheeled in a wheelbarrow, put her in the wheelbarrow, wheeled her out to the car, and drove her to town. And the helicopter picked her up. And so, yeah.
I'm not even going to comment. You went from a wheelbarrow to a helicopter.
Trust me, there's so many stories, it's hard, you can't tell them all right now.
I'm trying to figure out how, medical insurance figured out what to charge for that. Is there, a wheelbarrow thing? I don't know, But after a while, as you sort of alluded to earlier, around your early teens, you started to have enough of this, right? What were some of the things that made you feel like, okay, this is not my scene, I need to move on?
Well, my mom tried homeschooling in 6th grade, and we ended up looking at all the really cool boxes from Juneau, and we had a schoolroom set up in the big cabin with desks, but we never did school, and the basement fell in, so I went to 7th grade, and as soon as I got to 7th grade, I was wearing like a pink hat, and I noticed that all the girls who had their hair curled would get all the attention, so I had to get a curling iron. And so I said to my folks, I said, I really need a curling iron. And they grabbed me one. They plugged me into the generator. Well, and a mirror on the tree, these military mirrors with a cabinet, and hung it up. And so I'm out there before school. And I'm like, I've got to get out of here. This is crazy. These guys are insane. And so I always say I got out of there because I didn't have a curling iron. And the fact, a little bit more truthful is, it got a little dysfunctional. People, you know, too long in a 12 by 16 foot space will drive anybody crazy. And so it got a little dysfunctional, and I ended up becoming a ward of the court. And in between going to the next girls' home, because I did end up becoming a ward of the court, you know, just because it turned out to be a dysfunctional. And that's why I gave a disclaimer in the beginning. So anyways, while I'm waiting for the girls' home, which I didn't want to go to, this guy was auditioning for a band. And I was 14, and I loved to sing. That's how I survived that road. I used to sing all the time, and my brothers would walk behind me going, Christy, you sound terrible. And I'd just be singing away. And it worked, because I auditioned for his band at the DYA when I was 14, and he was older, he was 21, and I said, well, I can only sing with you for like 2 weeks because I got to go to a girls' home. And I thought that was a long time, you know. And he came back in like 3 days. He said, let me think about this. And he came back in 3 days and he said, I got an idea. No strings attached. You marry me and I'll be your guardian and you can sing in my band. Who's my mother? Woohoo! I jumped up and down at that one. And I still had to go to the girls' home, and he followed me, and we ran away for a year, and it was just all this stuff. And then the court signed me over to my mom when I was 16, and she signed me over to him, and I became part of a family that was half Jewish and half Christian, and eventually I hung out with the Jews so long that Christy just was like stopping me from getting involved. I mean, not that it's just that Christianity, if you know much, there's been some problems. Jewish people haven't had the easiest time, so I'd say, hi, I'm Christy, and I'm going to be with you now. And they'd be like, and they'd be very kind and everything. The nicest people I ever was with were the Jewish people. But that's me, you know. And so I went through a couple name changes, and the Israelis said, Hadahra, stick with Hadahra. So I did.
And you were married how long?
23 years. He turned out to be a really good guy. It was a really wild ride, but we got to do the band, we got to sing, and I had 4 kids and raised them all here with him. Not him, but him. And
I think I probably owe you some money at this point.
So my eclectic mother, you know, I can't imagine him seeing this story. I never would have imagined I'd be smiling about it. But, you know, with all the stuff we had to go through, Alaska was so beautiful to get out in. And the trees, I'd always have a fort, you know, under something. We lived outside predominantly. And now I like to live outside. And I like to sleep in my car. And I have weird quirks.
Still like sleeping in your car, huh?
I do. It's like a traveling bedroom.
Hadahra Ben Israel, everyone. Thank you so much. All right. Our final storyteller tonight was in charge of giving a bunch of tourists a very memorable Alaskan experience, and boy did she deliver with Alaska's help. Here's Sarah Manriquez, she'll help me with that, with a story we call The Little Tour Bus That Could.
Let the bass kick.
Close?
It was pretty close.
Say it.
Manriquez. So I first moved to Alaska a little over 7 years ago. And when I came, I wanted to have an Alaskan job. And I didn't really know what that meant. But when I got here, I found home in being a tour guide. And not just any tour guide. I was hanging with the big boys on the ice road up north on the Hall Road, and I was operating a 25-passenger coach to the Arctic Circle and beyond, and I was doing it year-round. Now, I had pretty limited winter driving experience when I very first came to Alaska. I had moved from Tampa, Florida. Before that, I lived in New Mexico. And before that, I grew up on an island in Central America. So, to say the least, there was an immense amount of training that happened before I hit the road with guests in my vehicle. And the company that I was with, they're notoriously they're the safest guides on the road, and their driving record was impeccable. And I was a little nervous I might change that. I was coming on board in the winter time, and everything that could possibly go wrong on my tours did. And, there's certain things that you can train for, and some things you cannot. As many of you guys may have come up the Hall Road, you'll know that winter can sometimes surprise you. So, one of the days that I was headed up the road, we stopped all these different ways between Fairbanks to Arctic Circle, and Arctic Circle is our turnaround point. And so we have a visit to the homestead in Joy, and we see the Trans-Alaska Pipeline along the Hall Road, and we cross the mighty Yukon River and stand on a frozen ice road and go sledding, and then eventually we get to the Arctic Circle, and we spend the whole day journeying to get there. And there's a particular part of the road that's really a favorite spot for me, and it's right before you actually get to the Arctic Circle. And on this particular day, it was pretty cold. It was -40, and I had 25 passengers on a 25-passenger coach, and I had people from all over the world on my vehicle. I had doctors from Michigan, I had newlyweds from Australia, I had a family from Brazil, and a bunch of people in between. And this particular area that I love to stop in, there's a pullout, and it's kind of Arctic tundra area. It's just rolling hills for miles and miles and miles. And on a clear day, it feels like you can see forever. When you look north, you can see the Brooks Range. You can also see the Ray Mountains. And if you look really close, you can see the Arctic Circle, and you can even see the dotted line across the landscape. And so this is a favorite spot for me. And when you get to this part on the road, usually it's about like sunset time. So it's right around 4:30, and it's winter sunset. So it's those beautiful pastel colors fill the sky. And we were getting there right around that time. And also this area is called Finger Mountain, for those of you who've been north. And there's these granite tours that jut out of the landscape. And so the area that I want to pull over in is just this perfect viewpoint that can see everything. And I'm noticing that there's quite a bit of wind on this particular day. I can feel it pushing against the coach. I can hear it whistling outside of the vehicle. And inside the vehicle, I can see what the temperature is. I can see that it's cold. But as a rookie, I can't quite tell how windy is windy. So we pull over at this pullout, and I know that it's pretty cold, so I'm like, all right, guys, they get the talk about keeping their gloves on, keeping their jackets on. Photos would be nice, but frostbite isn't, so let's keep bundled up. And normally on these types of stops, people sometimes stay on the vehicle. Not everyone is really excited about -40. And this particular group was not the case at all. Every single person was like, let's do it. I'm like, okay, this is great. So I push the button to open the coach door, and it doesn't open. I'm like, push, push, push. And it's an air-powered door, so all you have to do is push it, and it just automatically comes open. Meanwhile, I almost have an audience of people watching me try and open the coach door, and they're waiting, they're all in their gear, they have their face masks on, and I'm like, I'm a good guide. And this was about my third time on the road. And so at one point, I sort of get near the door and I'm giving it a nice, good body slam. And as soon as I get just the tiniest bit of that door to crack open from the vehicle, it flings open and slams against the coach. And it occurs to me in that moment, it's not that the door was inoperable, it's that the wind is so strong outside that it actually was pinning the door closed. And I thought, well, they're ready, so here we go. And I'm a little bit nervous. Had I known this was the wind strength, I probably wouldn't have taken them outside, but, you know, they're in for an Alaskan experience. So we get out, and in this particular area, it's pretty windswept normally, particularly if the winds are high. So it's hard to tell how deep the snow is. And as we go to this trail, this whole little trip should take about 15 minutes, including the bathroom. And I make my first step and go right into the snow. And it goes right up to about my thigh. And I'm 5'9", so that's deep. And so as we sort of start trudging through the snow to get up to this viewpoint, the wind is so strong. It's pushing against my entire body, and I'm actually leaning into the wind just to keep myself upright. And I kind of look over my shoulder to gauge what's happening behind me. And all I can see is the tops of people's heads, because they too are leaning into the wind just to kind of stay up. And so I'm like, okay, good choices today. And so we get up to the top of the hill, and everyone's kind of stoic. You can't see anyone's face, just the slits of their eyes with their mask. And we kind of all look at each other, and we nod. And I'm like, let's go back. And so then we trudge back down. And, you know, it should have taken us 15 minutes, ended up taking us about an hour. And I thought, well, an hour and -40, and the wind is, well, a lot. So, okay. So then we're trying to get back in the coach. Okay, we get the door open. All right, so we get everybody inside. And I'm sort of eagerly waiting to see how they respond. Was this good? Was this bad? Are you going to leave me here? And so they start peeling off their layers, and I see these giant Cheshire cat grins. And they were like, this is what we came here for. I was like, good, because that was on purpose. So we're only about maybe 30 minutes, 20 minutes from the Arctic Circle at this point, and it's starting to get a little bit darker, but we're still in those pastel colors. And as we continue back onto the road, I'm noticing that the wind is really picking up exponentially. And so it's really kind of pushing on the coach, and I'm noticing how much snow is in the road. There is quite a big snow berms that are on the road. And right now I can see it's daytime. But as we continue to move down the road, these snow berms are growing in size. And this is concerning. So I start gauging and tracking where all these things are. I'm looking at my odometer. I'm figuring out where I am on the road. What milepost am I at? Because on my way back home, it's going to be dark. So I'm trying to have a game plan. I'm like, if it continues to be this windy, these snow berms are going to grow. And so as we continue down the road, there's this one particular area, in this whole area, there's reflectors everywhere. And because this area is prone to whiteout, those reflectors are really crucial tools in helping drivers figure out where they are on the road in a whiteout and ideally keep them on the road. And the Dalton Highway is known for having a pretty soft shoulder. And you want to stay away from that soft shoulder. And if you get too close to it, particularly in a heavier vehicle, your tires can get stuck in it. You go way too close to it, you can actually roll the vehicle. And we're coming up to this particular section on the road where there are no reflectors, but there should be. And I'm noticing that there's 2.5 foot snow berms on the road, and they're taking up almost half the road. And so I'm having to move all the way around into the other lane to go around them, and I'm thinking, this is gonna be fun on the way back. And a trucker once told me, there's a lot of tall tales on the Dalton Highway on the Hall Road, and a trucker once told me that in this particular area, the reason that there were no reflectors was because in a really bad whiteout, a truck had rolled and unrooted all of them, and they never had been replaced. So this is kind of churning in my mind. And I'm like, okay, 98.1, okay. Tracking all these snow berms. So we get up to the Arctic Circle, and we pull into this pullout, and it's pretty protected there. There's trees there, there's outhouses there, we have hot cocoa, I brought it, I roll out the red carpet, and we have our official Arctic Circle crossing in style, and we're happy campers. But as a rookie, I spent way too much time at the Arctic Circle. We're there for like almost 2 hours. Way too long. Now, during this time, I don't hear any chatter on my CB radio, which should have been a little concerning. And I just didn't think anything of it at the time. So I round up all my kittens, get them back on the coach, and we start heading back down onto the road. And as soon as I pull out from the Arctic Circle onto the road to start heading south to go back to Fairbanks, firstly, it's dark, and secondly, I'm immediately hit with a whiteout. And I'm a little bit stunned because in that area that we were in at the Arctic Circle, I didn't realize how protected it was. And at the Arctic Circle, it was beautiful. All the stars were out. You know, we were like, we probably are gonna see the aurora. Stars are out. And as soon as I pull onto this road, we're just slammed with snow and wind and a really big hill. The first hill that you go up after you leave the Arctic Circle is called Beaver Slide. And most of the hills have earned their names during the haul road days, during the pipeline days. And this particularly poetic trucker named this hill, and he was at the place which I was at on top of the Arctic Circle, looking south at Beaver Slide. And he described a vehicle that he saw, a big truck, completely lose control and start going back down that hill. And he said, you know, it was kind of like a beaver's tail patting its dam. Beaver Slide, 12% grade. So I need to get up this hill, and I need to do it in a whiteout and at night, and I need to stay in what I think is the center of the road. And on top of all these things, normally we kind of get it going so we can get some momentum to go up this hill. And I'm going about 5 miles an hour. And I'm like, okay, we can do it, okay. And we're starting to climb up this hill. And the really great thing about the modern day trucks and coaches that are on the road is they're a lot more powerful, they're a lot stronger, but they also have a lot of really fancy safety features. Like, if your engine gets too hot, it will automatically turn off. And I know this, and I learned this the hard way in training on a different hill. So I'm thinking about this, and I am keeping a very close eye on my meter as it goes into the very hot water. And I'm like, come on, baby, come on. We just need to get up this hill. Come on, come on. And so it keeps dipping, and it keeps dipping, and it keeps dipping, and you can hear the engine. Oh. I'm like, oh, it's mad. It's so mad. And so we're like almost to the top. We're almost to the top, and it's dipping, and it's lower, and it's in the hot, and now it's very, very hot, and we're at the top. And I'm like, okay, only like 190 more miles to go. And so as we continue to go down the road southbound, the wind is no longer whistling, it is howling. And the wind is no longer pushing against the coach, it is pitching the coach from side to side. We're like a little boat in a very big sea of snow. And from side to side we go. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put on a little movie. It's about little animals, and this will be great. I need to distract these guys. I cannot be talking right now. I need to be focused. So I put in my little movie. I tell them how great it's going to be. And within 5 minutes, they're like, excuse me, we're trying to concentrate. Can you turn off the film? Sure, you're trying to, me too. Okay. So I pop out the film, and I'm like, okay, these guys are nervous. This is bad. So as we continue to pitch down the road, I'm trying to recall back on where are those points on the road? Where are these berms? And I'm where I think is the center of the road. Where I think. And so I'm like, okay, I'm in the center, I'm going, and I hear click, click. People are putting on their seatbelts. And I'm like, okay, this is good. So we keep going down further, and I am the only person on the road. There is no one else. And this is pretty unusual for the Dalton Highway. I mean, you're never alone on the road. And that night, I was alone. And there's really not much that we can do other than move forward. In a whiteout, you can't just pull over to the side, because if someone else was traveling on that road, you would be a huge, huge safety hazard. And so you have to keep moving forward. It's your only choice. And I have a CB radio where I can kind of communicate, but it can only go so far. I also have a satellite phone, but you need to be outside to use it. So I'm like, okay, we're gonna keep going. And every time my radio crackles, everyone on the vehicle, I'm like, ugh. So here we go. And I'm going about 5 miles an hour. And with snow that's blowing that heavy, and when there's that much fresh snow on the road, your tires really spin in place as you're moving forward. So I'm going 5 miles an hour, but we might as well be going 1 mile an hour maybe at some points. And I'm trying to go as fast as I can safely. And at one point, I kind of see kind of a light, maybe, I don't know, and the radio's starting to crackle more, and there is a truck, and he is coming northbound, and I'm going southbound, and I'm like, okay, thank God, there's someone else here. And it occurs to me as we get closer and closer that we're gonna have to pass. So I'm not gonna worry about that yet, though. First, I'm not alone. One good thing. And so everyone's sort of like listening in on this conversation as the radio starts to crackle a little louder, and he comes in, and he goes, "Is anyone there? You there?" I'm like, "This is Little Tour Bus." And he's like, "How you doing there, Little Tour Bus?" "We're doing pretty good. We're on the road, we're having a good time. How are you?" So we kind of banter back and forth, and he's giving me kind of an update on weather. How far is this gonna go? And I get the pleasant news that this is gonna last us for quite a while, that we're in for a heck of a night. And as we get closer and closer, he also acknowledges that we need to pass. And he says, I'm in the center of the road. I said, me too, but we are not aligned. And that's a little concerning. So we're kind of offset, and I know when he passes me, I need to immediately get into his tracks, because he has compacted all of the snow, and trucks are so much heavier than coaches. And so even that little bit of compaction of snow is gonna help me maybe go 10 miles an hour. This is important. So I need to get in his track so I can just move a little more quickly and struggle a little less as we're going through these crazy winds. And so as he gets closer to us, he goes, "Hold it steady." And he starts coming, like full speed ahead. I'm like, okay. And I am going still about maybe 4 miles an hour. And the coach is pitching, the wind is howling, his truck is pitching, and the people sitting behind me on the driver's side kind of lean away from the window. I swear, if you were in that seat and there was not glass in the window, it felt like you could reach your arm out and just kind of touch it, which didn't make anyone feel super great. So as he starts to pass me, I start going. I need to accelerate. I need to get into those tracks. And so I get into the tracks as fast as I can. He gets on the radio. He wishes me luck. And he also lets me know, he goes, Little Tour Bus, there's a big one on back there just a little bit. And I'm like, okay, thank you. So to me, that meant way down the road, there was gonna be a really big berm I should be concerned about. What he meant is I just came through a really big berm, and I almost went off the road, and it was really scary, and you're about to go through it now. And so little did I know, speeding off into his tracks, I was headed straight for the giant monster berm I had seen earlier, and this was the section that had no reflectors. And I go plummeting at about 10 miles an hour into a giant 3.5-foot pile of snow on the road. And I hit it like hitting concrete. And it comes up over the hood, splashes onto my windshield, and my front tire is anchored into it. And I'm like, okay. And before I can start to think, how am I going to get out of this? The coach starts to move because that tire was acting as a pivot point. And that wind that was pitching us was now swinging us. And it was slow, but it was steady. And I'm like, okay, training, coming down, and I'm kind of like putting it to reverse and putting it into forward and trying to rock out of it and trying to break through it and trying to move my wheel, and everyone on the vehicle's like, and I'm like, okay, we're doing good. And as the vehicle starts to continue to swing, I can feel the first set of our back tires kind of flirt with that soft shoulder. And you can feel the change even through the tires, just the way that the snow feels underneath the vehicle. And so I can tell that we're getting into a soft area, and that's gonna mean maybe 2 wheels in. And it's not like I can get out. I mean, earlier I could barely open the door. I think I might get lost if I go out now. So normally we have a shovel, maybe I could dig myself out, but not when the weather's like this. And so I'm rocking and pushing and trying to break free of this thing, and I'm kind of breaking away, and as I'm starting to make this progress, I feel the inside of the second wheel start to go into that soft shoulder. And this is concerning. I'm alone, and I start to think, what if I did roll? What does that mean? What does that look like? I mean, they're wearing seatbelts, that's good. But the reality is, no one would find us until that storm settled. We would roll off the road and we would just be there. And so I'm like, I need to get us out of this. And so as I start feeling that back inside tire start to slowly go off the road, I break us out of the berm, and we start to move forward. And as we pull through the berm, I can feel both of those tires like coming back up onto the road, and I'm like, okay, good, progress. So this weather, this wind continues on for hours and hours and hours, and miles and miles and miles, until what should have been maybe a 2-hour stint ended up turning into like almost a 6.5-hour stint, just for me to get near the Yukon River, which is about the halfway point. And once we start finally getting closer to the Yukon River, the trees get much bigger. I have one last big hill. It's called Roller Coaster. So we go all the way down in a whiteout, all the way back up, and then dropping off the backside of that is when the trees get big, and really big. And as we start going down the backside of that hill, the wind lifts up, and it stops snowing. And finally, we can see the sky, and we can see every single star in the night sky. And I'm like, okay. And as we start going down this hill, the aurora comes out. And it's fantastic. It's this huge, giant green band. And then it's 2 bands. And then it's 3 bands. And now it's purple. And now it's dancing. And now everyone in the coach is jumping up and putting on their winter gear and getting their tripods because they need to get off and they also need to see the aurora. So at the bottom of this hill, I knew that there was a nice place for me to pull over. And so I pull over, and they are practically leaping off the vehicle almost before I can stop. And I needed a minute. So my hands are sort of like permanently encrusted around the steering wheel. And I'm just kind of sitting there. So they get off. And the 2 last guys who are in the back of the vehicle were actually, one drove the haul road back in the days of the pipeline, and they were both truck drivers who actively drove. And they walked up to me and they're laughing. And the one guy said, I'd like to shake your hand. And I shook his hand. And the other guy said, I wasn't sure if we were going to make it. I wasn't sure if we were either. And the other guy said, I've never seen anyone drive like that, thank you. And as we got them back on and headed back, that tour remains the longest tour I've ever been on. It remains the best group of people that I've ever had on a vehicle, such troopers. And it was a really good reminder that no matter how big or bad or impossible the storm is, you have to keep moving forward. Even if it's baby steps, even if they don't feel that big, you have to keep going forward. Because if you do, you will weather the storm. Thank you.
Sarah Manriquez. Okay. Our final memories tonight. I have a doppelganger in town who is the daughter of a prominent local doctor. Based on how often I've been mistaken for her, she must be pretty damn Fairbanks famous. When I made the cover of the newspaper during the Needs Drive. Not the best time to make the cover. And I married the guy who once went to the Farmers Loop transfer site to find me a table and came home with $350 cash found in an old manual crank coffee grinder. Alaska Magazine told that story. All right, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I got some people I got to thank. John Huff, Matt Howder of Alaska Universal Productions, the Hot Denali Harbs, the Solaire Studio Singers, my daughter for the help in the video. Tim Palmer, did you make it tonight? No, I'm going to have words with him. He did their open narration, the Inyo Yupiak Dance Group. Papa John's donated pizza, Safeway donated food. Sarah Smith provided this outfit from Frank's Menswear. I'm trying to get her to sell spacesuits, because they are suits after all, but she's not interested. Photographer for the poster and program is Michaela Wild. Dr. Mary Beth Lee and the In a Time of Change program here in Fairbanks helped us recruit awesome storytellers, Lori Neufeld and KUAC. Thanks for airing Dark Winter Nights radio and TV shows. We're on the third Saturday of the month at 7. Subscribe to our podcast. Thanks to all of our volunteers who worked so hard for just a t-shirt. But it's a pretty cool t-shirt. I don't know if you saw it. It's got an astronaut and a DeLorean, and they're both mine, which is kind of exciting. And the real force behind Dark Winter Nights is our executive producers. Ryan, hey Rob, remember when you did that stupid thing? Peterson. Robin, no. Robin, she has no last name. Chris, I love the smell of burning toilet paper in the morning. Zwolinski. Jared, where'd I put my gloves? Huey. Katie, don't forget the transmogrifier. Ott. Annalise, let them eat crepe. Duclouzeau. The UAF Communication and Journalism Department for giving me steady work. And our storytellers, Laverne Hakenson, Knut Kielland, Cody Dean, Hadahra Ben Israel, Sarah Manriquez, and our audience storyteller, Kate Gowee. Remember, these are the stories we tell up here in Alaska on Dark Winter Nights. Good night, everybody.